Hotep Scholars, I'm Professor Horton, and once again, this is STEM for 2nd grade. We've been talking all about matter. We said that there are 3 states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. We said that solid is matter that has both size and shape. Liquid is matter that has size but no shape. And gas is matter that has no shape and no size. In last week's lab experiment, we created a tasty treat called crystal candy. In today's lab experiment, we'll get a chance to observe solid, liquid, and gas interacting together in an extremely fun way. Join me in the lab when we learn to make raisins dance. Alright, scholars, for today's lab activity, you'll need 2 clear glasses, water, raisins, and Sprite. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to observe a difference between the interaction of raisins and water and the interaction with raisins and Sprite. So in order to do that, we're going to put both of our glasses side by side. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to put the same amount of raisins in each jar. All right, there's one jar, and here's the second. Do your best to get them to be around the same amount. They don't have to be perfect, but we do want to try to make sure that neither jar has too much more than the other. That looks pretty good. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pour the water into the first jar. In your launch log, I want you to illustrate what you see happening with the raisins after we pour the water into the jar. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pour the Sprite into the second jar. Make sure you go slowly with the Sprite because it will fizz up, and if you pour it quickly, it will overflow and you might have a little bit of a mess. All right. So once again, in your launch log, I want you to take a close look at what's happening to the raisins that are in the Sprite. You notice how they keep going up and down? If you look closely, you'll notice that there are small bubbles on each of those raisins. Those bubbles contain air, which once again is a gas. Because of that, the gas rises to the top and it carries the raisins at the same time. When the gas reaches the top, the bubbles pop and the raisins drop. So once again, in your launch log, illustrate your observations of not only the raisins and the water, but also the raisins and the Sprite. Once again, nothing is happening to the raisins that are in the water. Alright, scholars, so in our launch log, we are going to illustrate what we observed during our experiment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw out my jar. And I know we had 2 of them, so I'm going to put up 2 jars. And need a round part at the top for an opening. That'll work. All right. And since this is an illustration, actually since this is a documentation, because we're documenting what we saw, let's go ahead and label each jar so that we know the contents of the jar. So this one will be water. And we'll make this one Sprite. All right. Now, we know that both jars had raisins in them at the bottom. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a few groups of raisins. There we go, that looks good. And we tried to get the same amount in each jar, so we'll go ahead and, even in our documentation, we'll try to make them look like there's the same amount. Now, let's think back to our experiment, and if you're at home, you can continue to look at the experiment, and you'll notice that the raisins that were going to the top, once again, had bubbles on them. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop some raisins into this jar for our illustration. There we go. Put some of them going to the top. There we go. All right, so now we've got some raisins that look like they're rising to the top. And what we really want to illustrate is the fact that on the raisins that rose to the top, there were these little tiny bubbles on each and every one of them. So I'm going to try to put a bubble on all of the raisins that went to the top. That way, when I look back at this experiment, I'll remember why those bubbles went to the top. Actually, why those raisins went to the top. So the raisins went to the top because they had bubbles on them that carried them to the top. And then when the bubbles got to the top, they popped and the raisins came back down. So I'll leave these 2 raisins with no bubbles. That way I'll remember that they fell once they got to the top. I think the last thing that I need here is something to let us know that we're at the top. There we go. Try to make it look a little bit fizzy. Okay, that works. And This one just looks calm. All right. See if I can add some bows here. There we go. That'll work for my illustration. All right, scholars. Once again, illustrate your observations in your launch log. All right, that's all I have for you today. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.